The bathroom door creaked open, and my heart stopped. Steam curled around me, thick and warm, but it couldn't hide the shadow of Mr. Callahan standing there, his silhouette sharp against the hallway light. I clutched the towel to my chest, my voice lost in the thud of my own pulse. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was just a college kid, crashing at my best friend Nate's new house in suburban Denver for the weekend. But something about Mr. Callahan, Nate's dad, had always felt off, like a storm cloud hovering too close. I'd known Nate since freshman year at Colorado State. He was the kind of guy who could charm a room without trying, blonde, athletic, with a grin that made you feel like you were in on his best joke. We'd bonded over late-night study sessions and cheap beer, our friendship growing into something deeper, something unspoken. I was Ethan, the quiet one, always overthinking, always watching him a little too long. That weekend, Nate had begged me to check out his dad's new place. "It's massive, Ethan," he'd said, eyes bright. "Dad's been fixing it up since the divorce. You gotta see it." I agreed, partly because I could never say no to Nate, partly because I was curious about Mr. Callahan. He was a mystery, gruff, distant, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. The house was a sprawling two-story on the edge of town, all clean lines and glass, surrounded by pines that whispered in the wind. Mr. Callahan greeted us at the door, his handshake firm, his smile tight. "Welcome, Ethan," he said, his voice low, like gravel. I felt his gaze linger, and a shiver ran down my spine. Nate gave me the grand tour, gleaming kitchen, hardwood floors, a basement gym that smelled of fresh paint. But it was Mr. Callahan who kept drawing my eye. He moved with purpose, like a man carrying a weight he couldn't put down. When Nate ran upstairs to grab his phone, Mr. Callahan leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "You ever keep a secret, Ethan?" he asked. I froze. "What kind?" He didn't answer, just smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, after Nate passed out on the couch, I couldn't sleep. The house felt alive, creaking and settling like it was whispering secrets of its own. I slipped into the guest bathroom, hoping a shower would clear my head. The water was hot, soothing, until I heard the door. "Mr. Callahan." My voice cracked. He stepped into the steam, fully clothed, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something. About me. About Nate." My stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" He took a step closer, the air between us thick with heat and something else, something dangerous. "I know how you look at him," he said. "I see it. Because I've looked at someone that way too." I couldn't breathe. His words hit like a punch, unraveling everything I'd buried. I'd spent years hiding my feelings for Nate, convincing myself it was just a crush, just a phase. But Mr. Callahan's eyes held a truth I wasn't ready to face. "I'm not who you think I am," he continued, his voice raw. "And neither is Nate." Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "Read this," he said, pressing it into my hand. "But not here. Not now." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the steam, the paper burning in my grip. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it would change everything. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, painting the granite counters gold. Nate was at the stove, flipping pancakes, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I hadn't slept, the paper still unopened in my pocket. Every time I looked at him, Mr. Callahan's words echoed, "I know how you look at him." Yo, Ethan, you good? Nate asked, sliding a plate toward me. His smile was easy, but I saw the flicker of concern in his blue eyes. Yeah, I lied, forcing a grin. Just tired. Mr. Callahan joined us, his presence filling the room like a shadow. He didn't mention the night before, but his gaze kept finding mine, heavy with expectation. I excused myself to the backyard, needing air, needing space. Under the shade of a pine, I unfolded the paper. It was a letter, handwritten, dated 20 years ago. The words were faded but clear. I love you. David. I can't keep pretending I don't. David. Not Nate's mom. Not a woman. My heart raced as I read on. The letter spilling a story of forbidden love, of a man forced to hide who he was. Mr. Callahan had written it to someone he'd lost. I didn't hear Nate approach until he was beside me. What's that? He asked, his voice light but curious. I shoved the letter into my pocket, my face burning. Nothing. Just trash. He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Instead, he sat beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. You've been weird since you got here, he said softly. Talk to me. I wanted to. God, I wanted to tell him everything about the letter, about his dad, about the way my heart ached every time he smiled. But the weight of Mr. Callahan's secret held me back. That afternoon, we drove into town for coffee, the mountains looming in the distance. Nate was his usual self, cracking jokes, stealing sips of my latte. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unraveling. When we got back, Mr. Callahan was waiting, his expression darker than before. Ethan, he said, pulling me aside as Nate headed upstairs. Did you read it? I nodded, my throat tight. Who's David? His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might not answer. Then he said, someone I loved. Someone I lost because I was too scared to fight for him. The words hung between us, heavy with regret. I saw the pain in his eyes, the kind that comes from years of silence. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because, he said, his voice breaking. I see you and Nate, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. The air in the house felt heavier after Mr. Callahan's confession. I stood in the hallway, his words echoing in my mind. I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. My hands trembled as I shoved the letter back into my pocket, its edges worn soft from my restless fingers. Nate bounded down the stairs, his energy a stark contrast to the storm inside me. Hey, you want to hike tomorrow? He asked, oblivious to the tension. His smile was so easy, so unguarded. It made my chest ache. Sure, I managed, my voice tight. I couldn't look at him without seeing his dad's pain, without wondering what secrets Nate might be carrying. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, the letter burning a hole in my thoughts. Mr. Callahan had loved a man named David, had hidden it, had lost him. Was he warning me about Nate? Or was he warning me about myself? The questions gnawed at me, each one sharper than the last. By morning, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. Nate was already up, lacing his boots for the hike. Come on, Ethan, he said, tossing me a water bottle. Let's get out of here. We drove to a trailhead in the Rockies, the peaks jagged against a cloudless sky. The air was crisp, scented with pine and earth. Nate led the way, his strides confident, his laughter echoing off the rocks. I followed, trying to focus on the crunch of gravel under my boots. But my mind kept drifting to the letter, to Mr. Callahan's shadowed eyes. Halfway up the trail, we stopped at a lookout, the valley sprawling below us. Nate sat on a boulder, his hair glinting in the sun. "You've been quiet," he said, his tone softer now. "What's going on?" I wanted to tell him. I wanted to spill everything me feelings. His dad's secret. The fear that I was falling for someone who might not feel the same. But the words stuck in my throat. "Just stuff," I said, hating how weak it sounded. He studied me, his blue eyes searching. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" The sincerity in his voice broke something in me. I turned away, staring at the horizon, my heart pounding. "Yeah," I whispered. "I know." Back at the house, Mr. Callahan was in the garage, tinkering with an old motorcycle. His hands were smudged with grease, his focus intense. But when he saw me, he paused. "You okay, Ethan?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, but my eyes must have betrayed me because he set down his wrench and stepped closer. "You read the letter," he said, not a question. "Who was he?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "David." Mr. Callahan's face softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through. "He was my best friend," he said. "We were in our 20s, working construction together. I loved him, but I couldn't say it. Not back then. Not in a small town where everyone knew your business." "What happened?" I asked, my throat tight. "He left," he said simply. "Got tired of waiting for me to be brave." The words hit like a stone. I thought of Nate, of the way I'd been dodging my own truth for years. "Does Nate know?" I asked. Mr. Callahan shook his head. "He knows I'm not perfect. But not this. Not yet." That evening, Nate suggested a movie night, his enthusiasm infectious. We sprawled on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us, some action flick blaring on the screen. But I couldn't focus. Every brush of his arm against mine felt electric. Every laugh a reminder of what I was too scared to say. When the credits rolled, Nate turned to me, his expression serious. "Ethan, you're freaking me out. You've been off all weekend. What's wrong?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The letter, his dad, my feelings, it was too much. Instead, I stood, muttering something about needing air, and slipped outside. The backyard was dark, the stars sharp overhead. I sat on the grass, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. The letter was still in my pocket, a weight I couldn't ignore. I pulled it out, rereading the words, "I love you, David. I can't keep pretending I don't." Footsteps crunched behind me. "Ethan." Nate's voice was soft, concerned. He sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body. "Talk to me, please." I looked at him, his face illuminated by the moonlight, and something in me snapped. "Nate," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to tell you something." His eyes widened, but he didn't pull away. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "I'm listening." I took a breath, the words clawing their way out. I think I'm in love with you." The silence that followed was deafening. Nate's face was unreadable, his eyes locked on mine. My heart pounded, regret and relief warring inside me. I'd said it. There was no going back. "Ethan," he said finally, his voice soft but firm. "I need to tell you something too." Nate's words hung in the air, heavy with promise and fear. My confession still burned in my throat, raw and exposed. And now he was about to unravel something of his own. The night felt too still, the stars above us holding their breath. I've been trying to figure out how to say this. Nate started, his voice low, almost fragile. He looked down, picking at a blade of grass. I've known for a while. About me. About how I feel. My heart stuttered. What do you mean? He met my eyes, and there was something new in his gaze, vulnerability. Maybe. Or courage. I'm gay. Ethan. I've known since high school, but I didn't know how to tell you. Or anyone. The world tilted. All the moments I'd spent analyzing his smiles, his touches, his laughter, had I been blind? Or had he been hiding? Just like I had. I didn't want to mess things up. He continued, his voice barely above a whisper. You're my best friend. I didn't know if you could. He trailed off, his hands clenching into fists. I reached out, my fingers brushing his arm. Nate, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You're not messing anything up. He looked at me, his eyes searching, and for a moment, I thought he might lean closer. But then he pulled back, a flicker of fear crossing his face. There's more, he said. It's not just about me. It's about Dad. My stomach dropped. The letter. Mr. Callahan. The pieces were starting to fit, but I wasn't ready for the picture they'd form. What about him? I asked, my voice tight. Nate hesitated, then stood, pacing a small circle in the grass. He's been weird lately. Distant. I found some stuff in his office letters. Old photos. I think he's hiding something. Something big. I swallowed hard, the weight of the letter in my pocket unbearable. Like what? I don't know, Nate said, frustration creeping into his voice. But it's eating him up. And I think it's why he's been so intense with you. Like he's, I don't know, testing you or something. I thought of Mr. Callahan's words in the bathroom, the pain in his eyes when he spoke of David. He wasn't just warning me about my feelings for Nate, he was trying to protect his son, maybe even himself. Nate, I said, standing to face him. I need to show you something. His eyes widened as I pulled the letter from my pocket. I hesitated, my hand trembling, but there was no turning back. I handed it to him, watching as he unfolded it, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as he read. This is Dad's handwriting, he said, his voice barely audible. Who's David? I shook my head. He told me it was someone he loved. Someone he lost. Nate's face crumpled, a mix of anger and hurt. Why didn't he tell me? I don't think he knows how, I said softly. He's scared. Nate. Just like we are. The silence between us was thick, charged with too many unspoken truths. Nate folded the letter, his hands shaking, and tucked it into his pocket. I need to talk to him, he said, his voice resolute. I nodded, my heart racing. I'll come with you. We found Mr. Callahan in the living room, sitting alone with a glass of whiskey, the TV off, the house silent. He looked up as we entered, his eyes flickering with something like fear. Nate, he said, setting the glass down. Ethan. Nate didn't waste time. He pulled the letter from his pocket and held it up. What is this? Dad. Mr. Callahan's face paled. For a moment, he looked like he might bolt, but then his shoulders sagged, and he gestured for us to sit. I owe you both an explanation, he said, his voice rough. He told us about David, his first love, a man he'd met in his 20s. They'd kept it secret, meeting in shadows, stealing moments when no one was watching. But the world wasn't kind to men like them back then, and David wanted to be open, to be free. Mr. Callahan couldn't do it. He chose safety, married Nate's mom, buried his truth. I thought I could forget him. Mister, Callahan said, his voice breaking. But you don't forget love like that. It stays with you, like a ghost. Nate was quiet, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. I wanted to reach for him, to anchor him, but I didn't know if he'd let me. Why didn't you tell me? Nate asked finally, his voice raw. I was ashamed. Mister, Callahan said. Not of who I am, but of what I did to David. And to you? I didn't want you to hate me. Nate's eyes glistened, and he shook his head. I don't hate you, he said. I wish you'd trusted me. The room felt smaller, the air thick with their shared pain. I sat there, an outsider in their story, yet tangled in it all the same. Mister, Callahan's confession had cracked something open not just for him, but for me and Nate. I'm sorry, Mister, Callahan said, his voice barely a whisper. To both of you. Nate nodded, but he didn't speak. He stood, brushing past me, and headed upstairs. I started to follow. But Mister, Callahan's hand on my arm stopped me. Ethan, he said, his eyes searching mine. Take care of him. Please. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Upstairs, I found Nate in his room, sitting on the edge of his bed, the letter in his hands. You okay? I asked, sitting beside him. He shook his head. I don't know what to feel. About him. About you. My heart sank, but I forced myself to stay calm. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, I said. I'm here. No matter what. He looked at me, his eyes soft, and for the first time, I saw something like hope in them. Thanks, Ethan, he said, his voice barely audible. The next morning, the house felt different, like the air had been scrubbed clean by last night's confessions. But the tension lingered, curling around us like smoke. Nate was quiet at breakfast, pushing his eggs around his plate, his eyes distant. Mister, Callahan kept his distance, his usual gruffness replaced by a cautious silence. I wanted to fix it, to bridge the gap between them, but I was barely holding myself together. My confession to Nate still hung between us, unanswered, a live wire waiting to spark. Let's get out of here, Nate said suddenly, standing up. I need to clear my head. We ended up at a small diner in town, the kind with sticky tables and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed last week. Nate stared out the window, his fingers tapping restlessly on the mug. You didn't sign up for this, he said finally, his voice low. My dad's drama. My stuff. I'm here because I want to be, I said, my heart pounding. You're not just my friend, Nate. You're. I stopped, afraid to push too far. He looked at me, his expression softening. I know, he said. I just need time. Okay. This is a lot. I nodded, swallowing the ache in my chest. Take all the time you need. Back at the house, Mr. Callahan was waiting. He'd found an old photo album, its pages yellowed, its leather cover cracked. I thought you might want to see this, he said, handing it to Nate. We sat in the living room, the album open between us. Photos of a younger Mr. Callahan smiled back, his arm around a man with kind eyes and a wide grin. David. They looked happy, unguarded, like the world hadn't yet taught them to hide. He was good to me, Mr. Callahan said, his voice thick. I wasn't good enough to him. Nate traced a finger over the photo, his expression unreadable. Why didn't you fight for him? He asked. I was scared, Mr. Callahan admitted. Scared of what people would say. What it would mean for my life. For you. Nate's jaw tightened. You should have told me. I deserve to know who you are. Mr. Callahan nodded, his eyes glistening. You're right. I'm sorry, Nate. I'm trying to do better now. The conversation stretched into the afternoon, raw and halting, as Nate and his dad peeled back years of silence. I stayed quiet, a witness to their healing, my own heart heavy with hope and fear. That evening, Nate found me on the back porch, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He sat beside me, closer than before, his shoulder brushing mine. I've been thinking, he said, his voice soft. About what you said. About us. My breath caught. Yeah. He turned to me, his eyes steady. I've liked you for a long time, Ethan. I just didn't know how to say it. Or if I could. The world seemed to pause, the air between us electric. I reached for his hand, my fingers trembling as they laced with his. You're saying it now? I whispered. He smiled, small but real, and leaned closer. His lips brushed mine, tentative at first, then deeper, like a promise. It was brief, but it was everything to spark in the dark. A beginning. When we pulled back, his eyes were bright, a mix of fear and joy. This is new, he said, laughing softly. Scary, but good. I laughed too, the tension in my chest easing for the first time all weekend. Yeah, really good. But the moment didn't last. Mr. Callahan's voice called from inside, sharp with urgency. Nate. Ethan. You need to see this. We rushed inside, finding him in the kitchen, his face pale, a phone in his hand. It's about David, he said, his voice shaking. He's in Denver. Nate froze. What? Mr. Callahan handed him the phone, an email open on the screen. It was from David, dated that morning. I'm in town. I heard you moved here. Can we talk? The room spun. Nate looked at me, then at his dad, his expression a mix of shock and something else, hope. Maybe. Or fear. What does this mean? I asked, my voice barely steady. Mr. Callahan ran a hand through his hair, his face a storm of emotions. It means I have a chance to make things right. Or to mess them up all over again. Nate set the phone down, his hands trembling. Are you going to see him? Mr. Callahan hesitated, then nodded. I have to. For me. For us. The weight of his words settled over us, heavy with possibility. I looked at Nate, his hand still warm in mine, and knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. The email from David changed everything. The house, once a place of secrets and tension, now buzzed with a new kind of energy, anticipation, fear, and a fragile hope. Mr. Callahan spent the morning pacing, his phone clutched like a lifeline, while Nate and I tried to make sense of what was happening. He's really here? Nate asked, his voice tight as we sat in his room. After all this time? I nodded, my thumb brushing over his knuckles, grounding us both. Your dad's scared, but I think he needs this. Nate's eyes softened, but there was a shadow in them. What if it breaks him again? Or us? I didn't have an answer, but I squeezed his hand. We'll figure it out. Together. Mr. Callahan decided to meet David that afternoon at a quiet cafe in downtown Denver. He asked Nate to come, and after a long pause, Nate agreed. You coming too? He asked me, his voice almost pleading. Of course, I said, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what my role was in this, but I knew I couldn't let Nate face it alone. The cafe was small, with mismatched chairs and the warm smell of coffee. David was already there, sitting by the window, his hair graying, but his eyes still kind, just like in the photos. He stood when he saw Mr. Callahan, and for a moment, they just stared at each other, decades of pain and love hanging between them. Tom, David said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. David, Mr. Callahan replied, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Nate and I sat at a nearby table, close enough to hear but far enough to give them space. The conversation started slow, halting, as they navigated the years apart. David had moved to California, built a life, but never forgot Tom. Mr. Callahan spoke of his marriage, his regrets, his son. I didn't know how to find you, David said, his voice breaking. I wanted to, but I thought you'd moved on. I tried, Mr. Callahan said, his eyes glistening. But I never stopped loving you. Nate's hand found mine under the table, his grip tight. I could feel his heart racing through his palm, mirroring my own. The conversation stretched on, raw and honest. David had come to Denver for a conference, but hearing about Tom's move had pushed him to reach out. He wasn't asking for a second chance, just closure. Maybe. Or a way to heal. When we left the cafe, Mr. Callahan was quiet, his face a mix of relief and sorrow. Nate drove us home, the silence in the car heavy but not oppressive. That night, Nate and I sat on the roof, a blanket draped over our shoulders, the city lights flickering in the distance. I'm glad he saw him, Nate said, his voice soft. But it's weird, you know, knowing he's been carrying this all these years. Yeah, I said, leaning into him. But he's trying to make it right. That's something. Nate turned to me, his eyes bright under the stars. You make things right for me, Ethan. You always have. My breath caught, and before I could overthink it, I kissed him. This time, it wasn't tentative, it was sure, deep, a promise we were both ready to keep. The next day, Mr. Callahan was different, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. He and Nate talked more openly, their words careful but genuine. I watched them, my heart swelling with something like pride. But the peace was fragile. A week later, David called again, asking to meet one last time before leaving Denver. Mr. Callahan agreed, but this time, he asked to go alone. I need to do this, he told Nate, his voice firm, to say goodbye properly. Nate nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. When Mr. Callahan left, we sat in the living room, the silence stretching between us. Do you think he'll be okay? Nate asked, his voice small. I think he's stronger than he knows, I said, pulling him close. Just like you. Hours later, Mr. Callahan returned, his face unreadable. He sat us down, his hands clasped tightly. David's leaving tomorrow, he said. We talked. We cried. We forgave each other. Nate's eyes glistened, and he reached for his dad's hand. I'm proud of you, he said, his voice thick. Mr. Callahan pulled him into a hug, and I saw the tears he'd been holding back. I'm proud of you too, kid, he whispered. As they held each other, I felt a warmth spread through me. This was healing, not perfect, not complete, but real. And for the first time, I believed we could all find our way forward. The days after David's departure felt like a new chapter. The house, once heavy with secrets, now hummed with a quiet hope. Mr. Callahan was more open, his gruff exterior softening as he and Nate rebuilt their bond. Nate and I, too, were finding our rhythm, navigating the fragile, beautiful thing growing between us. One evening, as we grilled burgers in the backyard, Mr. Callahan raised a beer, his eyes glinting with rare warmth. "To new beginnings," he said, glancing at Nate, then at me. Nate clinked his bottle against mine, his smile shy but real. "To us," he added, his voice low enough for only me to hear. But life doesn't let you rest for long. A few weeks later, Nate got a call from his mom, who lived across town. She'd heard about David Smalltown's talk, and Denver was no exception. She was furious, accusing Mr. Callahan of lying, of betraying their marriage. Nate came to me after the call, his face pale. "She wants me to cut Dad off," he said, his voice shaking. "She says he's not who I think he is." I pulled him into a hug, feeling his heart race against mine. "She's hurt," I said. "But your dad's trying. He loves you." Nate nodded, but the doubt in his eyes lingered. That night, he went to see his mom, hoping to calm her down. I stayed at the house, helping Mr. Callahan clean up the kitchen, the silence between us comfortable but charged. "She'll come around," I said, scrubbing a pan. "She just needs time." Mr. Callahan sighed, drying a plate. "I hope so. For Nate's sake." When Nate returned, he was quiet, his shoulders slumped. "She's not ready to talk," he said, sitting heavily on the couch. "She thinks Dad's been lying to everyone, including me." I sat beside him, my hand finding his. "He's been lying to himself most of all," I said. "But he's trying to be honest now. That's what matters." Nate leaned into me, his head resting on my shoulder. "I don't want to lose either of them," he whispered. "You won't," I said, hoping I sounded more certain than I felt. The next week was tense, with Nate caught between his parents' pain. But he and I grew closer, stealing moments in the chaos, a kiss in the car, a late-night talk on the roof. Each one felt like a small victory, a step toward something real. One afternoon, Mr. Callahan suggested a camping trip, just the three of us. "We need to get away," he said. "Clear our heads." We drove to a lake in the mountains, the water glinting under a late summer sun. We set up tents, fished, and built a fire, the crackle of wood filling the silence. For the first time, it felt like we were a unit, not just a father, a son, and a friend, but something more. By the fire, Mr. Callahan told stories of his youth, not about David, but about the adventures he'd had, the dreams he'd chased. Nate listened, his eyes bright, and I saw the love between them, bruised but unbroken. Later, as we lay in our tent, Nate turned to me, his voice soft. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "I don't know how I'd do this without you." I kissed him, slow and sure, my heart full. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered. The trip was a turning point. Back home, Nate started talking to his mom again. Small steps toward reconciliation. Mr. Callahan joined a support group for older LGBTQ+ folks, his first tentative step toward living openly. And Nate and Awell, we were falling, hard and fast, into something neither of us had expected. But the past wasn't done with us. One evening, as we watched a movie, Mr. Callahan got a letter, not an email, but an actual letter, postmarked from California. It was from David. "He's moving back to Denver," Mr. Callahan said, his voice unsteady as he read it aloud. He says he wants to stay in touch. Maybe try again. Nate's eyes widened, and he looked at me, a question in his gaze. I squeezed his hand, my heart racing. What are you going to do? Nate asked his dad. Mr. Callahan folded the letter, his hands trembling. I don't know, he said, but I'm done running from who I am. The words settled over us, a promise and a challenge. I looked at Nate, his face lit by the flickering TV, and knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together, three souls, bound by secrets, love, and the courage to keep going. David's letter hung over the house like a storm cloud, full of possibility and danger. Mr. Callahan was quieter, his eyes often lost in thought, as if weighing a future he'd never dared imagine. Nate and I tried to keep things normal late-night talks. Stolen kisses, but the uncertainty seeped into everything. One morning, as we sat at the kitchen table, Mr. Callahan broke the silence. I'm going to call him, he said, his voice firm. David, I need to know what this means. Nate nodded, his jaw tight. Just be careful, Dad. I reached for Nate's hand under the table, feeling the tension in his grip. We both knew this could change everything again. The call happened that afternoon. Mr. Callahan took it in his office. The door closed, but we could hear the low murmur of his voice. Nate paced the living room, his nervous energy contagious. What if he leaves? Nate said suddenly, stopping in his tracks. What if he and David, I don't know, run off together or something? I stood, pulling him into a hug. He's not going anywhere, I said. He loves you too much. Nate buried his face in my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. I just got him back, he whispered. I can't lose him again. When Mr. Callahan emerged, his face was unreadable, but his eyes were bright. David's coming to Denver next week, he said. He wants to meet again. Not just for closure, for a real conversation. Nate's face paled, but he nodded. Okay. What do you want to do? Mr. Callahan sat across from us, his hands clasped. I want to see him. But I need you to know, Nate, this doesn't change us. You're my son. That's forever. Nate's eyes glistened, and he managed a small smile. I know, Dad. The week before David's visit was a blur. Nate and I spent every moment we could together, as if grounding ourselves for whatever came next. We hiked, watched bad movies, and talked about the future, our future. I want this, Nate said one night, his head resting on my chest as we lay on his bed. You and me. For real. My heart swelled, and I kissed the top of his head. Me too, I said. No matter what. David arrived on a crisp fall morning, his presence filling the house with a strange energy. He was older, grayer, but his smile was the same as in the photo swarm. Open. Mr. Callahan greeted him with a handshake that lingered, their eyes locked in a way that spoke of years unspoken. They talked for hours, sometimes alone, sometimes with Nate and me. David was kind, funny, and painfully honest about the life he'd built without Tom. He'd never married, never found anyone who matched what he'd felt all those years ago. I didn't come here to disrupt your life, David told Mr. Callahan, his voice steady. I just needed to know if there was still something here. Mr. Callahan looked at Nate, then at me, and finally back at David. There is, he said, his voice raw. But I've got a lot to figure out. Nate was quiet through most of it, his hand in mine like an anchor. I could feel the storm in him, The fear of losing his dad to a past that felt so big. But he didn't pull away. Didn't shut down. That night, after David left for his hotel, Nate and I sat on the porch, the air cool against our skin. I'm scared, he admitted, his voice small. But I want Dad to be happy. He deserves it. I pulled him close, my heart aching with love for him. So do you, I said, and you will be. The next day, Mr. Callahan made a decision. He'd stay in touch with David, see where it led. But his priority was Nate and rebuilding the trust they'd lost. David agreed, promising to visit again, to take things slow. As we said goodbye to David at the airport, I saw something new in Mr. Callahan, a lightness, a hope he hadn't had before. Nate noticed it too, and for the first time in days, he smiled. Back at the house, life settled into a new rhythm. Nate and I were official now. Our relationship no longer a secret. Mr. Callahan teased us sometimes, his gruff humor a sign of his acceptance. And slowly, Nate's mom started coming around, her anger softening into reluctant understanding. But the real change was in us. We'd faced secrets, fear, and love head-on, and we'd come out stronger. Nate and I were building something real, something worth fighting for. And Mr. Callahan was finally living his truth, one careful step at a time. Fall turned to winter, and the house in Denver became a home not just for Mr. Callahan, but for Nate and me. We spent weekends there, cooking dinners, watching the snow pile up outside. The secrets that had once threatened to tear us apart now bound us closer. A shared history we carried together. Nate and I were inseparable, our love growing in the quiet moments, late night drives, hands intertwined, or mornings spent tangled in his bed, laughing about nothing. We weren't perfect, but we were honest, and that was enough. Mr. Callahan and David stayed in touch, their calls and visits becoming a steady part of our lives. They weren't rushing into anything, but there was a spark between them, a second chance neither had expected. Nate watched it unfold with a mix of caution and hope, his heart opening to the idea of his dad finding happiness. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Mr. Callahan pulled out the old photo album again. This time, he added a new picture, one of him and David, taken during David's last visit. Their smiles tentative but real. I kept this hidden for too long, Mr. Callahan said, his voice steady. I'm done with that. Nate reached for my hand, his eyes bright. I'm proud of you, Dad, he said. Mr. Callahan smiled, a rare, unguarded grin. I'm proud of you too, kid. Both of you. That night, Nate and I lay on the roof, bundled in blankets, the stars sharp above us. I used to think love was this big, scary thing, Nate said, his voice soft. But with you, it's easy, like it was always supposed to be this way. I turned to him, my heart full. It was, I said, kissing him softly. It is. The road hadn't been easy. Secrets, fear, and pain had tested us all. But we'd faced them, together, and found something stronger on the other side. Mr. Callahan had reclaimed his truth. Nate had found his courage. And I'd found a love I'd never dared dream of. As the snow fell, blanketing the world in quiet, I knew we weren't just surviving anymore. We were living fully, openly, and without regret. And that was the most dangerous, beautiful secret of all.